that was how we see the world. That was how we see what we do and what our responsibility was. And that always struck me as something extremely noble and revealing about the American character was that mindset. There's a person out there who's isolated, and we will do anything to get them back.
Tower, Delaware Six is release to you, runway 4 left, 040 at 5, clear for takeoff.
Seat tied, altimeter 0 eyes, we're clear for takeoff, clear for the airspace. Fire projector. My burn ramp curve was at 354 minutes. So yeah, that's on. Next picture, 16, 15,000, Whatever on target.
John, thanks for joining me on the podcast. I'm excited. You know, anytime I have a helicopter guy on, I'm like, it's just pure magic. Those things are flying, just violently shaking themselves apart, just being held on by, you know, some big bolts. I think there is a God bolt. There's God bolts in the F-16, but you know,
it's duct tape and baling wire is usually what keeps us in the air. And when you start to study the aerodynamics of what's going on in a helicopter, it becomes progressively more terrifying. And you're like, this thing should not work, should not be in the air.
I 100% believe it. You know, we're talking before we hit record here. You have a long and distinguished career in the Air Force. Lots of combat operations, from Operation Anaconda, the Roberts Ridge, some pretty sporty stuff in Iraq and Afghanistan, which we'll talk about all that. You know, this is like the interesting piece to me is how small of an Air Force it is, despite how big. But my first duty station was the 41st Rescue Squadron as a casual lieutenant, just waiting to go to pilot training. I didn't know anything, still don't know anything today. But you were in that squadron, and that squadron was so busy. I mean, the rescue squad world so busy to begin with. I think in the 13, 14 months I was there, like we didn't overlap, or we hardly overlapped because you were overseas or had other things.
Yeah, just pass it in the hallway. And yeah, so that's crazy. But everybody you knew, those are all my buddies. Stay in touch with them. And yeah, it's fantastic. Making those connections to the old world.
Yeah, it's kind of wild. So again, it's a true testament just how small the Air Force, the aviation community really is. But I want to kick it off. Where did your journey, where did your path begin to put you on this path, to pursue aviation, become a rescue pilot, now writing books? How did this all start?
I've always had military folks in my family. You know, my dad was an Air Force Academy grad, 65. He knew Lance Seigen while he was there. You know, once again, small world.
Yeah.
And, you know, and so he was there and then going through pilot training right as all this stuff was going on in Vietnam. And he got sucked into Vietnam and all that. Had an uncle who was in the Navy. He flew the Sky Raiders in the 50s. And so every time I was over at his house, you know, his walls covered in all the plaques, and he's got the books and the pictures and hearing the stories about, you know, the tours. And he never saw any combat, but still just that life, you know, just that military life, being around aircraft. And then my dad had, you know, was always taking us to the air shows, Griffiths Air Force Base in upstate New York. Lived in Thailand when I was a little kid. I don't remember it, but, you know, we were living in Thailand over on the Mekong River. He was flying EC-47s. This is after 73, and so we had pulled out of Vietnam, but we were still listening to what was going on. And so those EC-47s, you know, those are the old Goonie birds from, you know, did like, you know, jumps on D-Day. Paratrooper jumps on D-Day over France, and then now they over in Vietnam flying around. And they'd be flying around in Laos up and down the border, and the Vietnamese would send in MiGs and stuff like that and try and chase them out and shoot them down. You know, it was a pretty dangerous stuff. You know, they lost some of those birds.
Well, so I never heard of that, but I was just thinking, I was like bebopping around that area with MiGs, and then the absolute suppression of enemy air defenses. Seed grew out of Vietnam. Right, with the Soviets giving the Vietnamese a lot of surface-to-air missile systems. The last thing I want to be flying around in is a big piece of metal, twin engines, you know.
Yeah, and they had to fly very specific, predictable patterns because they were trying to geolocate and triangulate the radio calls they're listening to and they're snooping on. And so while they're up there, you know, they just send in some MiGs trying to, you know, kill some Americans and They did, then set up ground fire traps for those sapphire traps, and they lost some guys, but he made it out okay. And then, but I just like I said, I grew up around Griffiths Air Force Base in upstate New York while he was in the Guard, and he would take us out to the gunnery ranges. And they had just gotten the A-10. The A-10 was brand new back then, and I still remember, as a little kid sitting out on that the gunnery tower, the range officer is, just watching those A-10s come in and gunning away, and then some OA-37s coming in with their little miniguns. And
awesome.
The combat tweet. I just
that's awesome. Actually, I saw that. I did the air show in Rio Negro, Colombia.
Okay,
they still fly it.
Oh,
so you're like, oh
so
man,
awesome. That is such a great bird. The tweet. They
don't make them like they used to.
Yeah, because they just made it out of like cast iron. And they had some slide rules, and they're like, what's this thing gonna do? Triple that.
Right.
for whatever structural member. Like actually in pilot training, it happened not too long before I got there. Somebody landed wheels up in the tweet. And so if you look at the tweet, you've got the flaps on the wings. Then up front, they've got a speed brake that's right near right by the front landing gear, the nose landing gear. It's a big plate that comes down. And so he landed on the flaps and that speed brake, and just skidded down the runway on those. And they just brought over a crane, lifted it up, got the gear down, took it into the hangar, replaced the flaps, replaced the speed brake, and it was flying again the next week. I mean, that's a durable old bird. And
you're not going to do that with the T6. That one's going to be out for quite a while if it's coming back. Yeah, I mean, you hear the stories in the tweet days where guys bump wings doing formation sorties and stuff like that. It's like, it's fine. Put a little duct tape on it and it's flying the next go.
That really is. They say people fall in love with their first bird, but that tweet was just fantastic. Yeah. Didn't have much giddy up behind it. Took a while to, put the throttles up, had to wait 10 seconds to get going, but it was fantastic. I love that bird.
What in pilot training, did you have any struggles or like anything that was challenging for you? That you faced?
Yeah, it was, I had a problem with air sickness. It was, and so what happened was before I went to pilot training, I went and did aerobatics just on my own, just to go experience it and get some familiarization. And so, got sick the first time, the second time halfway through, the third time, just at the end, and the fourth time I'm good to go. And so my body just needed time to adjust. And when I got to pilot training, the same pattern happened. Just got sick the first time, second time halfway through, third time just at the very end. So I was good to go, and things were going to be good, but they had this program that somebody had invented. I don't know who it was. Somebody pulled it out of their backside. And they said, well, what we need to do is desensitize him by sending him to the barany chair. Did they still have
the medieval torture device that's for modern day. It just doesn't like rip your limbs apart, but I can't.
Yeah, it's like one of those dunking booths, the dunking chairs they would use on witches. There's no medical proof that does anything. It's just some guy thinks it does. So they put me in that chair and they spun me and spun me and spun me. And the guy spinning me wore a lab coat and glasses, and to protect his face. And he hands me a bucket. And so they spin you and spin you. Then he has me move my head around to every axis, thinking this is going to desensitize me. And I'm flying the next morning. And so that was just like an exquisite torture, just horror. It was kind of Clockwork Orange.
I believe it.
Remember?
I mean, when I was teaching, we out of every class, I feel like there's like out of 30 or so people, 4 are going to kind of have air sickness. Mm-hmm. A couple just need a couple rides and they're fine. And there's always like 1 or 2 that get put into the commander's action program for air sickness. And it's like, hey, they have to fly every single day and then fly in the morning and then go do the baramy chair in the afternoon.
Yes.
And you're like, and I mean, I feel like probably everyone listening or watching, everyone's been sick at some point.
Yeah.
Or maybe motion sick. Like, dude, like that burns all the expendable or extra brain bites you have. Like when you're just fighting to basically stay alive and not throw up. Yeah, we're putting them in the chair, spinning them, and like, hey, by the way, you got to get ready for your flight and go fly tomorrow. Good luck, champ.
It's like some old shock therapy from the 50s. You know, oh, this'll toughen them up.
That's right.
Yes, I remember. I was trying to ride my bike home. I got on my bike, made it about 10 feet, and just keeled over right into the pavement, wiped out. So I had to walk my bike home. I couldn't ride. Eventually got to sleep. And when I woke up in the morning, there's a name for it, where your eyes are bouncing back and forth.
Yeah. I know what you're talking about.
I couldn't focus on things because my eyes were still bouncing back and forth. So I'm already sick when I wake up, go in, and of course I get sick immediately in the aircraft. And now they're like, well, I guess that means you need some more. Get on,
Keep it going. Turn it up
and so so it's making it worse, progressively worse every time. And so I'm just actually coming into the squadron in the morning already sick. And just to tell you a horrific story. I mean, this is horrific, but here it goes. So eventually, they're going to kick you out if you keep getting airsick.
Yeah. And
so I realized I'm in this loop and they won't let me out. I've asked hey, don't send me to that. I'm getting worse. And they're like, nope, sorry. It's, written down on paper. We have to do it.
It's the policy.
Yeah. And so I go, well, I'm just going to have to swallow it. I can't let them know I'm throwing up.
Oh.
And so the only way to get through this is to pretend that it's not happening. And so I remember we're up doing the acrobatics. We're into acrobatics phase now, and we start a loop. And I start the loop, and I throw up at the bottom of the loop as it's starting. And just pulling on back, pulling on up. The mask is full, and just gobbling it down. And as I come up over the top of the loop inverted, I throw up again. Just fill it on up. And so coming back down the back side of the loop, gobble it down. And as I'm coming through the bottom, pulling through in the bottom, now you're G-straining. And as I G-strain, it happens again, and I lose my strain. So I lose the strain, and I start to black out. And so as we're coming through the bottom of the loop, I'm completely blacked out. I can't see anything, can't see my instruments, can't see the horizon, and I do it again. And so I'm just in the blackness going, when should I let go? When should I and I just pull it out. And this feels about right, and I let go, and the vision comes back, and I'm just cleaning out that mask a third time.
Oh.
And my instructor's like, well, that wasn't the best loop I've ever seen, but I guess you kind of pulled it off. And I was like, God, dude, if you knew what I just did.
Here's what I just hear. If you want to know what the definition of being an athlete is, there you go. There's no plan B. You must win in this case. That is, that is brutal. Fun facts for the listeners, right? I think the T-37 still to this day is the fastest G onset of any Air Force plane, right? Mm-hmm. So it can pull some Gs, and you're sitting side by side with your instructor there. So to hide that and hold it all together, it's just brutal.
It was brutal. It was brutal. But so got through that, and so he's like, "Are you okay over there?" I'm like, "Oh, I got some hiccups, I think."
A little indigestion. It's Mexican last night, dude. That is brutal. So that's a horrific story. But look at you now. You made it.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, so did that, and so now they think, "Oh, look at that, he's passing." So I got out of the barany chair and didn't have to go. And so now my body was just adjusting normally. And a few rides later, I was fine. So made it through there though. And I was always trying, I knew I wanted to go rescue, wanted to go fly helicopters, but you know how beautiful jets are. You know what it looks like when an F-16, takes off in full burner, unrestricted climb out. You just watch that happen. There's nothing like that on Earth. And so I was still just tempted to go T-38s and just go live that life, but something just said, no, you got to go rescue. And that was the best choice I ever made. Things worked out. I think that's where God wanted me to be.
Yeah, and obviously the missions that you were involved with, I have no doubt that as we talk about them here, learn more about the lives you saved and impacted doing those missions. So I definitely can believe that. Interesting enough, which is for me, I did not know about combat search and rescue when I commissioned. Right, like I've told the story on the podcast to other people. I went to ASBC when I commissioned, so down to Maxwell for 6 weeks, whatever it was, for the lieutenant school. And it was about the time like all the Air Force was getting websites for their bases, So I Google Moody and like, oh, there's like there's a rescue group there. I'm like, that sounds cool. And so I called one of the numbers that was on the website, and a new lieutenant, I won't mention his name, answered the phone in the squadron. I'm like, hey, this is Lieutenant Waters, and I'm gonna be a casual lieutenant, and I'm ASBC. I'll be there in a couple of weeks. Like, oh, I'll be your sponsor, right? So that's how I got pulled into the 41st, even though I had orders to the rescue group.
Okay,
so I show up to the 41st, and then the guys we were talking about beforehand just kind of put me to work as a snacko and the duty officer or whatever. And it took the group about a week to realize, like, hey, where's this like Lieutenant Waters? He was supposed to show up here. And so all those guys in the squadron were like, oh no, he's ours now. Possession's 9/10 of the law.
We got to go for cleaning
yeah,
the hallways.
It was like, and it was a great, I got to go ride around, be the survivor, shoot the gun. Meanwhile, my buddies were like the unit deployment manager for the group or schedulers.
Oh, that's
or
fantastic.
exec.
Yeah,
so,
that's a good time.
Every now and then it works out. But to me, I find it interesting that, hey, you kind of knew, like, how did you know you wanted to go do rescue? How much did you know about that mission set at that time?
I think it all stems back to, and I think I'm just realizing this now, as we're having this conversation. I was fourth grade, and I remember seeing a book called Into the Mouth of the Cat. And it was the story of Lance Saigon in Vietnam and how he won the Medal of Honor. And a huge part of that story was the search and rescue efforts for him. And one of the hallmarks of the American experience or our way of war in Vietnam was if a pilot was shot down, the whole war almost pretty much stopped. And they would dedicate literally hundreds of aircraft, bring in the carrier battle group would reposition to try and get this American back. And that always struck me with that was how we see the world. That was how we see what we do and what our responsibility was. And that always struck me as something extremely noble and revealing about the American character. Was that mindset. There's a person out there who's isolated, and we will do anything to get them back. And I remember that. I remember I can't remember where it was. It was an account from a Japanese sailor. Might have been the Battle of Midway or something else, and they're right in the middle of the battle. Everything's going on. You've seen from World War II, just thousands and hundreds of thousands of rounds being shot into the air everywhere. And there was an American that had parachuted down in the middle of the Japanese fleet, and he's just out there bobbing around in his raft. And a PBY, and the Japanese sailor saw a PBY Catalina, that big lumbering seaplane, and it flies right through the middle of the firefight, lands, taxis past that guy. Somebody reaches out, grabs him, pulls him into the Catalina, and it flies away right in the face of this battle. And the Japanese guy didn't understand why they would risk all that to save one person. And so it was a very unique mindset.
That is the piece there, like the value of the human life versus an object, right? And I do, like, when I went to pilot training after being in the rescue squad, I was like, I want to go do rescue. I thought it was such a noble calling. And then I was like, the A-10s showed up at Moody when, I was there. And that was like the first time, the range is right there. So you hear it. And then flying some of the, sitting in the back of the helicopter or in the briefs and then sitting in the back of the helicopter, listen to A-10s do rescort. I was like, man, like rescue is such a, to me, that's the ultimate calling to go out there. It's nothing more noble than that mission set, I don't think.
Yeah, and there was something else that sparked, I guess, that made it more than a job, made it a purpose, made it a calling. I was visiting a friend. We were up in Palos Verdes, California. He takes me, goes, hey man, there's this guy in the area. He's got this amazing garden I want you to see. And it was on this cliff face in Southern California. And he was just an old guy. Like, I think he was in his mid 80s, and he had this beautiful garden he'd been hand building for, 30, 40 years or something like that. So we go there. He shows us around. We have a great time, very hospitable, wonderful man. And he was walking with a limp, and I didn't think anything of it. And we said our goodbyes. And as we left, somebody goes, hey, do you know who that guy was? And I'm like, no, I'd have no idea. And this lady told me his story is that he was a world famous pediatric cardiologist. He had changed, over his career, he had revolutionized, I think, heart surgery. And what he had done had saved who knows how many thousands or hundreds of thousands of lives of children through what he did with heart surgery. And she goes, you know why he got that limp? He was injured on D-Day. He was like a young teenager, was in the D-Day invasion and was injured on the field and evacuated and never fought again. So he had, 1 day of combat. And I thought, who was the person who saved his life on that beach? Who was it? Somebody. Somebody had gotten him off the beach, got him to a landing craft. Somebody took him out to some other ship that then took him back to England. Somebody took care of him in England, and then eventually he gets back to the States and rehabbed. Nobody in that chain knew what they were doing of what he would become. Nobody knew that they were in that chain that would now save the lives of thousands or tens of thousands of children over the generations and make an incredible impact on the world. And so all those things like, oh my God, when you do that, when you go out and you save somebody, you don't know who you're saving. You don't know what impact that will have. And that's actually how I deal with a lot of the stuff from Afghanistan, where we look at, we say, hey, we did nothing. It was an absolute waste. And the way I get through it is I go, I don't know who I saved. Because the majority of the people I saved were Afghani and Iraqi civilians, that we would evac and get to the hospital. And what if one of those people, one of those kids, remembers the Americans who came and saved him and helped him out and gave him medical care? And 30, 40 years down the road, that plants the seed that there's a better way to live. There's a better way to structure a society. And that begins the snowball, which leads to genuine change over there, and brings them out of that Stone Age life they live in over there. Yeah. So I don't know. You never know what good you've done. And so once I realized that, rescue felt like a natural path to follow.
How was the transition going from pilot training through HH-60 school to getting to your first squadron? I mean, what was, I'm like timeline wise, I'm looking, you're a 96 grad.
Yep.
So I'm assuming you're probably graduating pilot training somewhere in 98, 99-ish.
January 98.
And then showing up probably as a co-pilot. I think is that the right term for
Yes,
it?
yes.
Okay, yeah. Everyone has different terms. But right before 9/11.
Let's see. So I arrived I was the 56, 56 rescue at Keflavik, Iceland. I got there in August of 98. And So it was, there had been like 25 years of peace, of nothing happening. The last combat ops were really in, Vietnam. And then just some sporadic things since then. And there was a very non-combat mindset. Everybody thought peace had broken out. It was the end of history. There were going to be no more wars anymore. There'd be some little scuffles now and then, kind of like a Somalia, or Panama, or a Desert Fox, just some very brief little bombing, and then it would all be over, and everybody thought that's what it was. And there was, people talk about there being flying clubs, and I hate to say, flying club, but there wasn't a combat mindset. And we were just there to keep the lights on, fly around. And of course, that changed radically after 9/11. It's interesting to see that the young generations now have never known peace. I mean, that's staggering.
That is wild. When you think about, you have, when we look at the military specifically, right? Like I do remember, I guess it was, 2019, right? As I was leaving active duty, you're like, you now have soldiers, sailor, airmen that are assessing into the services that were born after 9/11, So it's just been continuous combat operations.
Yeah, they've never known peace. And my generation, we'd never known war. There was nobody in our community that had done a combat rescue. Initially, we had a few guys who had come over from special ops, a fellow named Tom, and he was actually in Kosovo, and he rescued Goldfein.
Okay, I love a fellow named Tom. I mean, it's just
yeah. So he had rescued future 4-star General Goldfein, right? So we had a little bit of combat experience, but come over from other communities, and we were all just enamored. Oh my God, that guy got a real mission, And later on, years later, we would just be exhausted, going, "Please, no more missions today."
Yeah. It's not funny is the wrong phrasing, but I mean, just to show how fast things can turn around and the perspective can change.
Yeah, everything turned upside down. So. Yeah, but you show up in your unit and you're just like, hey man, how do I have some fun? How do I get some good deals? How do I get to travel around? I want to go see, go to air shows and see the sights and go touring. So it was a different world back then. And but Iceland was a great place to be.
Yeah, I bet. I mean, not to skip around too much, but I think it would be good to, jump, because Operation Anaconda, Roberts Ridge, we've talked about it on the podcast. I had Soup Campbell, who's an A-10 pilot. So, again, this bread and butter from Rescort to close air sport, integral part and all that. But I was like, in that time frame when, 9/11 happened, and then, CIA, 3-letter agencies are in Afghanistan, they're starting to spin up. I would imagine also on the back end that rescue is that's starting to spin up as well. Where were you? What was the timeline, and what did it look like for you guys to actually get into the region when we're talking about Operation Anaconda?
Yeah, so that was one of the problems with rescue, particularly back then, was we didn't generally arrive until the fighting was over. It took us too long to get into place, and so the spec ops had moved in there, H-53s, H-47s, all the special ops guys, they're running around doing, this, and the CIA ops, Mi-17s. And it looked like we were going to miss everything again. And our first push got there. Our first guys didn't leave until late November. I think it was like November 25th or 26th was our first guys leaving the States. And so they weren't there, in position until early December. So the fighting had been going on for over a month in Afghanistan. And I didn't go on that push. My mother had just passed away. And so that was that was a horrible, horrible situation to go through. And so that occurs, and I was just on standby. And so I got over there I think I left in late January. And so I was on alert by February. And first we went into Pakistan, and we arrived in Pakistan and, started to, we're looking at replacing the guys before us, and we're asking, hey, has anything been going on? And there really hadn't been much. They'd poked their noses into Afghanistan a little bit. I think went into Kabul, but hadn't had any real missions, to recover anybody, I believe. And then finally they were going to because Pakistan was too far away. There wasn't much we could do. Of course, getting over that mountain chain, to go rescue somebody, there wasn't much we could do. So they were going to push us forward to Kandahar. And so loaded up all our gear, flew. It was such an adventure to be flying, through the Hindu Kush mountain chain coming off of the Himalayas. And everything is just on a scale you've never seen before. And the mountains in Pakistan are gorgeous. And it's like being in a time machine and looking back to the Old Testament when you're flying through some of these valleys and you're seeing these entire villages just built out of stones and mud, huddled up on the edge of some mountain stream. And they've got some terraced fields where they grow some food, and there's no vehicles, no electricity. And you're just looking back in time of this other human condition that you've never been exposed to. And so it was such an adventure. And then we fly through the red desert, and it's sand that's as red as it's like this ochre. It just looks like sand dunes, those frozen waves of red. And so you're just seeing all these things you've never seen before. And we get to Kandahar, we shut down, and we try and establish a little command post and start sitting alert. And then we realize we've got no gas to go do a mission. And so we had arrived in Kandahar and got set up, but our birds didn't have it. We'd burned all of our gas getting there, and there were some Army units there, and they didn't want to give us any of their gas. And so what was kind of funny was we now had aircraft that were on alert, technically, in the middle of the combat zone, but they couldn't fly because they couldn't coordinate to give us the gas from the Army. They were preparing for some operation they were going to do, and they didn't want to share any of their gas. And so there was this battle going on between, the captains trying to get the gas, can't get it. The majors trying to get the gas, can't get it. Lieutenant colonels trying to get the gas, they channel it up. They got colonels and generals trying to get gas for our Hawks, and they can't get it. And so think of all the work that goes into moving, a detachment of rescue in theater, and then they can't do their mission. It was elevated pretty high up the chain, but whatever little political fights are going on, we can't get gas. And try and imagine how you would solve that. Put on your problem-solving cap. How would you get gas if you're in a remote location? And the official chains can't get it.
Well, it's probably gonna be something pretty creative, but I would think, being in the rescue world, you just put a C-130 with a bladder on it, and you guys do some FARP stuff like you always do. But
they could, but that would take the C-130s were being used for something else.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I just love this story. But one of our flight engineers, a staff sergeant, he's just sitting there fuming because he has the answer. He knows what to do. He goes and he grabs a couple honey-buns, out of our little chow hall thing. He's got some boxes of honey-buns, and he walks out to the guys in the fuel truck and he go, "Hey, will you guys hear some honey-buns? Could you go fill up those Hawks over there?" And they're like, "Yeah, we're on it."
They just completely skipped. Yeah, so that probably just created such a firestorm. That's awesome.
Yeah, so he comes back in like 20 minutes later. We're all fueled up. Cost us 3 honey buns.
Yeah,
and
you might hear about it in a minute, but it's going to be great.
Yeah, they can't take it back, Yeah. And so that is a lesson for anybody who's going to deploy. One of the most valuable things you can bring with you is rolls of dip. Bring things to
Trade and barter with.
Yeah,
Right?
bring things to trade and barter with. Rolls of dip, candies, foods, whatever, cigarettes, and those are like gold downrange. So, so we got some
sometimes.
gas and we were on alert finally.
That's funny. Man, what an interesting time. And then to see, obviously you watched it and you were woven into it, how Afghanistan developed, how Iraq developed into full-scale combat operations. So I really just kind of like to dig into those aspects. I'll let you navigate the space here because obviously you know the timeline of when you were Afghanistan, when you were in Iraq, and kind of how things transpired. Because I know, like, I want to talk about the 06 Bravo rescue mission and some of those, which I think are critical things in now history to discuss and document. So maybe take it from Operation Anaconda on.
Yeah, the maybe people will find this interesting, but I remember before any so we were on alert. I was on alert by late February, and Anaconda didn't happen for another month. Excuse me, early February. So I'm on alert by early February, but I remember very distinctly being very optimistic about what we could do over there. You know, hey, we're going to go over, we're going to make a lot of change. You know, we're going to give them America. How could they not want that? And we've got so much power. And I remember as I started flying around Afghanistan, just seeing it physically. And I go, there's no way we're ever going to control this place. When you see it and you see how geographically fragmented these places are, you know, back in these mountain valleys, these crags, and how inaccessible they are, you can't control that. There, like, you know, you fly over a ridgeline and you go, the people in that valley, it would probably take you a week of mountain climbing to get over to this valley. There's no roads. They're utterly isolated, and you can't exert influence in this valley. You might be in that valley, but you might as well be in Mars relative to that valley, one over.
Right.
Utterly isolated from each other, and you can't exert influence. You're not going to control these people. If you go chase them out of one place, they're just going to vanish into another place, and you'll never be able to control them. And then if you know a little bit about their history and how they don't, this is not going to happen. It would take millions of soldiers to be garrisoned here, permanently living in these places for decades. And it's not going to happen. So I became very pessimistic just in my first few weeks after seeing the geography of how that society is structured. There's no common arteries of commerce or trade or communication. There's just, it was very, very eye-opening just to physically see it.
I'm trying to remember, like, were we saying at that time was the objective to establish a democracy? I'm just trying to go back. Like, I know it evolved, you know, you got the pictures of the purple thumbs with doing voting, and I'd have to look to see like when we were really going after that. But it seems like hindsight being 2020, small surgical strikes to remove people who are bad, that were going to do bad things to us and our friends was probably the way to go versus this massive thing that it became. But that's a whole nother conversation of itself. But early in those days, was that what the messaging you remember?
It's hard to place the timeline of what I remember. I do remember watching some special on TV, and they were showing how women are now going to be liberated and they're going to be able to vote and work outside the home and have yoga classes and live like, you know, Western women. And I remember just, you know, going, you got to be kidding me, because that is exactly what kicked off the rebellion against the Soviets when the Russians were there. The communists. The Soviets hadn't invaded yet. If you go back, I believe 78, 79, they had some communist aligned leaders, and it was their efforts to liberalize and feminize the culture that kicked off the insurgency, the fighting, and the rebellion against the government And I was like, that just happened 20 years ago. And you're going to repeat the same formula? Like, we know what this does to the culture, and it isn't any good.
Right.
And sure enough, they did it. Yeah. So you could see that they had where ideology overrode reality. And that seems to be a very common theme in some of the plans that we put into effect. Won't go down that rabbit hole.
Yeah, sorry to digress there, but I was just curious. I mean, this is kind of to that point, right? Like this, as you said, like I can't really remember the timeline. Like I can't remember the timeline. And I mean, that's sidebar of why doing a little bit of these podcasts, documenting pieces of history that they just start falling away with time, you know?
Yeah, it goes down the memory hole. Yeah, but I'm pretty sure they were doing that right at the beginning of the fight as they're trying to get people motivated and get on board. And like, oh yeah, that'll be great. You know, knowing nothing about the region, I think that sounds like a great idea.
Yeah, we've done this before. We're pretty good at it. We'll just keep doing it.
It won't happen to us. Don't they know how good we are?
Yeah, right. Okay. Yeah, all right. Sorry to digress there and intervene. But yeah, obviously you're seeing this early on, like, this is not going to be a one and done and in and out to achieve these objectives. So back over to you.
So, but it was still a fantastic adventure. You know, it was such, you couldn't come up with a funner place to fly helicopters. You know, flying around Afghanistan up into the, up like the Bamyan Valley area, and just seeing also, I'm a big fan of history, you know, Alexander the Great came right there through the Kandahar Valley all the way up to Bagram and then turned east and went through the, I believe the Khyber Pass over to Pakistan. So the history of the Greeks, you know, there was an ancient Greek society that lived in the Bactrian Empire, lived in Afghanistan for hundreds of years after Alexander left. And so there's still remnants of it there. There's castles, you know, and fortifications that were built over 2,000 years ago, and they're still being used because they were in all the strategic locations. And so got to see that, got to see where the British were, and as a big history buff, just an absolute just adventure.
Yeah.
And then we started hearing word that the Army had located some last Al-Qaeda holdouts, like Al-Qaeda and Arab foreign fighters and some Chechens, and that they had isolated, you know, intel had found where they were up in the mountains, and they were going to set up a big hammer and anvil encirclement and swoop on in and wipe them out. And so we started hearing intel about that, and we were asking if we were going to be involved because we were about maybe an hour flight away, and we had great capability, you know, with our, you know, dedicated medical evacuation and recovery, and, you know, got our PJs, just the best medical care you can possibly ask for on a battlefield. And they're like, hey, we got something to offer here. And they're like, nah, no thanks. We got this covered. And then later on, to try and get a feel for the chaos that evolved, the command structure for the entire operation was such a cluster that I believe they study it in war colleges now, where they go, this is how not to run an operation. And there's something very illuminating about what happened there, in that if you do go study Operation Anaconda and how it was set up and how the fractured chain of command, chains of communication, this big melting pot hodgepodge of all these moving parts trying to come together, that was what we set up voluntarily when we controlled the tempo. We controlled everything about it. There was a static enemy. You know, the enemy wasn't maneuvering. They weren't acting. They weren't throwing curveballs at us. They weren't attacking us and throwing us off balance. We set the time. We set the tempo, we set the place, we had everything on our side. We had weeks or months to prepare. And we created a monster. And so that's a great question, is why is that? You know, on a big picture, what is in our culture where we would do something like that? Because it fell apart immediately. It wasn't something that fell apart under stress over days or weeks. It shattered at the very first enemy contact. The whole thing fell apart like glass, just shattered. How does that happen? How is it that the world's best and brightest and most highly trained military creates something like that? That's some questions that need to be asked. And another thing which plagued the GWAT for a long time was that the advent of rapid communications and global communications, you think initially that's going to speed things up. Oh, look at that. We can communicate so quickly, so fast from all over the world. And in fact, that slows things down because it gives the ability of so many people to put their fingers in that pie. Everybody can now be involved, and everybody demands to be involved, and everybody demands to have their say. And so, just to give you a quick analogy, when a soldier was injured in Vietnam, if a soldier gets hit, from the moment of injury, they could have a rescue helicopter airborne within 5 minutes. Somebody gets injured, the platoon leader gets on the radio, calls directly to the evac, or maybe one relay, one step in the chain, and those pilots are in that aircraft, rotor spinning and literally taking off within 5 minutes of the soldier being injured. In Afghanistan, it would take hours. And it was like that for years. It would take hours to get off the ground when nothing was going on. There's just and so we're sitting.
The approval process?
Correct. The approval process. It was an approval process that was, I'm trying to think of the term for it. Every single person in that chain of command has to approve. And so every single person gathers information. Well, what about this info? What about that info? What's going on over here? And then they say, okay, I give my thumbs up. And then it moves to the next thing. And the next guy gets his fingers in the pie. We would be sitting on the runway, engines running, blades turning, and the wounded person is 15 minutes away, and the person would die waiting for us because the chain of command could not act. It was paralyzed by too many options, too many people. And so that was horribly frustrating. And that didn't change until about 2008 or 2009. And I can go into that later on why it changed. But
yeah, I mean, I assume you have a book coming out, Three Rings Mindset. I assume this is probably some of the things you talk about because this is tying sports psychology, aviation mindset, blending all these worlds together with some war stories and practical applications. But I mean, do you dive into it?
I do touch on. I don't dive into it directly, but there is something indirectly. If you'd like to go down this rabbit hole, there are certain types of motivation on an immediate motivation. Why do you do? Think of what you did during a certain day. Why did I do those things today? What drove my training? And this is a broad subject. I'll try and apply it to young pilots or just, people who are developing themselves. And it's at the end of it, though, it's going to answer the question you're asking right now. And so there's many different motivations, but these are kind of the four primary. The first motivation, I call it a monk. And you train and you study and you work because you want to be better than you were yesterday. It's self-improvement. It's self-referenced. I want to be better. I want to be a better person. I want to be a better pilot. I want to be a better father, whatever it is. And you're referencing it against yourself and self-improvement. And that's something that can burn for your whole life, a lifetime. And so that's what drives you to become a better person. Then there's another type of motivation called a warrior. You work because you want to defeat an opponent. You want to have somebody to fight and you want to beat them. And so this is a great mindset for warriors, because you're looking forward to the conflict. You're looking forward to the strife. You're looking forward to the fight. And so that's a great motivation to have, but there are some problems, because what if you're doing a task where you don't have somebody to fight? Look at landing a helicopter in a brownout on a mountaintop. You're not fighting against an opponent that you can beat. And so sometimes it can be demotivating. Or what if you have weak opponents? If you have weak opponents in training, you'll think you're pretty good. Look at me, I'm winning all the time. But that's because you have a weak opponent, So there's some potential errors there for what drives the warrior. But that's a great motivation to have. Another motivation is called the worrier, where they don't want to let their friends down. They don't want to be the weak link in the chain. And they're driven by an anxiety of failure and shame. And this can burn very, very hot and keep you studying and working and always training. But it comes from a place of anxiety. And so when the chips are on the line and now you're going in to fight the opponent, you tend to have a really high anxiety levels or fear levels and stress levels, and you might choke. And so there's some problems there with the worrier. And the last one we want to cover is called the climber. And the climber is where you work every day because you want to be recognized as better than your peers. You want to be seen as higher up the hierarchy of you and your peers. And so that's probably the number one source of official motivation in the military. Awards and decks. Who won the quarterly? Who won the quarterly awards this quarter? Number one in the group. Number one in the squadron. Distinguished graduate. The military, and it works. We all like to be seen and perceived and recognized as being higher up that hierarchy. And we all have it to some degree, and it's very easy because you can make it official. Just our entire promotion system. And so our promotion system and our award system is built around making yourself look good relative to your peers. And so that kind of lends to who gets promoted are the people who that inspires. And so here's where it comes down. Here's where the problem arises. You can be promoting people whose goal is not to win. It's to not fail. It's to make yourself look good. It's to defer risk onto others. And so if you look at some of the big disasters that have befallen the military over the last 20 years, you'll see a hesitancy to take action from the chain of command, where they defer those difficult decisions. And they defer it to hire those above them so that they themselves will not have to assume the risk that is required in an emergent situation. And so
all I could have said, and I've been saying it's a CYA culture, everyone's trying to cover their ass. And like, if I don't mess this up, I'll get promoted.
Yeah. So when the American military is operating within a predefined military tempo that we control, we can act, like the kill chain. we can act with blinding speed like has never been seen in the history of humanity because we have an approved set of steps in a predictable scenario that we have controlled. And so we can do amazing things that have never been seen in history. But as soon as the enemy gets their vote and they punch us from the side and we end up with an unexpected situation where there's no pre-approved course of action, suddenly everybody freezes and nobody wants to act because we've conditioned this culture that everything you do was in some way pre-approved. And now we have to take risks and be creative and do things that are not pre-approved. And so a lot of times people will freeze. And we don't have to go into this, but did you know about the situation in Manda Bay where the Somali Al-Shabaab came across the border, I think it was into Kenya, and attacked that small airfield, Manda Bay?
Is this the one in the last like 3 weeks or so? 2
Oh,
weeks?
no, this was about 5 years ago, 6 years ago, something like that. But it was a surprise attack on a place that we had never imagined Al-Shabaab would attack. And they killed some Americans, blew up a bunch of aircraft, and vanished into the woods. And all of our rescue forces just sat there. We had rescue forces that were within 2.5 hour to 3 hour flight, never launched, just sat there, rotors turning, waiting for people to give them permission to act. And it was, no, we don't know what's going on. We can't begin to act until we know what's going on. And so the guys that were there had to self-rescue. The guys that were there, the Americans never came, and we kind of see that happening in Benghazi. We saw that in the U.S. Embassy in Kabul. Can't remember what year that was. Manda Bay and it just takes them forever. As soon as the playbook gets thrown out the window, the first instinct is for everybody to freeze, and they will not act until they get more information. And so, that's a big rabbit hole you can go down to. But that's, I'm hoping with some of the changes happening in the DoD now, they can start changing the culture where you can delegate freedom of action down to the lowest level possible. Because during my time in the military, we said that we did. We said that we had decentralized execution, but we did not. It was lip service, and everything was controlled from higher up.
It's interesting hearing you put official terms with it again. Like my simpleton mind was CYA, and then also like there are aspects we do very well, very quickly. But again, as you alluded to, it's standard, right? That's how I would say, like, this is what's been pre-approved. It's been briefed. This is how we do things. Obviously, within the confines of the standards, you can go out and execute at your authority level. I don't know how you get around that. The piece I'll say, I had Alex Pelbath on, who was responsible for the last C-17 mission to evacuate out of Kabul. Like, I had never thought about leaving a country. We always talk about, the offense going in the first round, right? But never really thought like, well, when it's time to close up shop, we saw that in Vietnam. Closing up shop wasn't really smooth. Same type deal going on.
That's the way to put it.
Yeah, right. So same type deal. We don't really think about we're leaving now, but at some point, someone is the last plane, the last person to step off the airfield, and there's no one else. There's no one protecting it, right? But he did say when we talked about the very early on, what you're saying is like global communications slow things down. Everyone wants to have their say. He's like, he got called by a general who, while in the chain of command and air mobility command, not inside of CENTCOM, wanted to give their 2 cents and their opinion on it. It's like, when we talk about tactical control, administrative control, these are different worlds. Like, you don't get a say here, right? But like, still wanted to say.
I've talked to some of the guys who were there during the fall of Kabul there. They were getting text messages over WhatsApp from U.S. senators telling them what to do because they were trying to figure out who gets on these airplanes and who gets evac'd. And the chain of command had fractured to such a degree that U.S. senators were weighing in via WhatsApp text, trying to direct what will or will not happen. And then there's just like, some captains and sergeants on the ground trying to make the best call they can in the middle of absolute mayhem. Crowds of people swarming over the aircraft. Some people saying we have to destroy the aircraft now and fall back to over here. And other people know we're going to fly them to Pakistan and just, fly as far as we can on a tank of gas and then try and get over to this place and then evade to safety on the Pakistani military. It was, if you read a novel about it, you wouldn't believe it. It would just, it would have been too outrageous. And so I guess that goes into another thing I'd like to talk about is that reality is always so far removed from how you train. The things that you encounter downrange in the real world are so fantastically bizarre. You have to make flexibility and adaptability part of your training regimens. Like a training objective. Okay, how do we go out and train you to have a mindset that can be flexible, adaptable, and also the belief in agency. The mindset belief that I have the ability to make decisions and break out of my training and do things that I've never seen before. Because if somebody doesn't believe that, they won't do it. And just to give you an example of crazy stuff that goes on, once in Afghanistan, we were out doing went down to a gunnery range, and we were going to give some Australians a chance to shoot the minigun. And so we had some Australian gunners from their they have H-47s. And so I'm in the back, we're riding along, and we're just down there shooting. And the base gets rocketed while we're out. And just those I think it's 107 millimeter rockets, they just fire those off. And so the base is being bombarded, and so nobody can take off to go chase these rocket guys down. We're the only aircraft that's in the air at the time. And the base commander from Task Force Nighthawk calls us up on the radio and tells us to go find the rocket guys and capture them.
Okay.
And he passes us the coordinates. And so we go blasting towards these coordinates, and I'm in the back. It's just me and these 4 Australians, and they're looking at me like I know what's going on. And and our left minigun is hard broke. The right minigun is out of ammo, so we've got no guns. And it's like, what the heck are we going to do when we get there? And so, well, let's do some really original problem solving that I never prepared for. And so we're flying out there. We're trying to get the ammo from the left ammo box transferred over through the cabin to the right ammo box so that gun can get up. We got all the guys in the left door now with our M4s and our Styrogs. And so we're going to be the guns for the left side of the aircraft. And we're going to somehow get there and do something. And, so not much happened when we got there because, the rocket launcher guys were long gone. But we all had to do some problem solving that we had never imagined we would have to do. And I could just talk for another hour on how every single thing that we did never matched our training. Everything was always different, and we had to modify it. And so if you want to train people for combat, you have to train into them the belief and the ability to modify what they've done and solve problems. That is one of the most foundational skill sets you can build into people before they go to war, is solving unique problems they've never seen before. And
pulling this thread for this kind of a random, because it made me think with what you're just describing there, doing something different. If we compare like Army dust off versus combat search and rescue, I didn't realize that dust off helicopters up until about a year and a half ago, like unarmed, they got the big, Red Cross painted on it. Can you elaborate on why, like, the Army doesn't have a combat search and rescue element or an armament piece versus the Air Force does, or why does it exist in this kind of why is it in this dynamic?
Let's see. There's some distinctly different things of what we're trying to do, and the Army is operating at a scale so much larger than the Air Force. Think of like division level or Army level. I mean, heck, back in World War II, Army groups, Army group level engagements with potentially tens or hundreds of thousands of people engaged. They have to work on more of an industrial scale. And in addition, optimally, an Army medevac leaves behind, from a safe area in the rear, moves to the edge of the battlefield, pokes their nose into it, and then comes back. And potentially hundreds of casualties waiting for them. And so they have to just shuttle back and forth as fast as they can. The Air Force, there's a high value asset. Let's say a Raptor pilot gets shot down far behind enemy lines. That pilot is extremely high value. There's only one of them back there. And he's isolated. And so he's isolated from friendly forces. And so the Air Force is going to penetrate through the air defense system, get around into the enemy's rear, pick up that one person, and then make their way back. Two very different missions. So it's not kind of on that industrial scale.
Makes sense. Okay.
And so they can invest more time, training, and equipment in a rescue force. I mean, if you look at how expensive just the dedication of resources, time, events, and airframes that the Air Force has put into rescuing a handful of pilots versus the Army trying to have an industrial scale rescuing hundreds or even thousands of people that need to be evac'd. So that, and then the resources it would take to do that. And so we are trained and equipped to operate behind enemy lines, and medevac was supposed to be operating more within friendly lines.
That makes sense.
So so very different things on what they're trying to do. And also think, so you could compare, the Task Force 160th, that highly specialized, highly trained, extremely expensive asset, versus, some 19-year-old warrant officers flying around a slick Black Hawk, within friendly lines. It's just an investment of time and resources and how long it takes to train them.
Yeah. Okay.
So
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Something I hadn't really thought about, but that makes complete sense when you really start diving in. But you did find, again, like from just time in Afghanistan, you see the video. There's videos on YouTube. Not all combat search and rescue is going to get that Raptor pilot. Afghanistan definitely became picking up soldiers who in intense firefights, coalition partners, civilians that were wounded. So really, it seemed like it, obviously utilizing the full tool set and the capability that, HH-60s and PJs and Crows bring to bear, not just sitting idly by in that conflict.
Yeah, that was a problem that was being juggled on the day I came in to Air Force Rescue, because they put us up there near the front lines waiting for that fighter pilot to eject. Well, it hasn't happened. If you've been sitting there for years, you're like, man, you've got this amazing asset sitting there. Are you going to let it sit there and not participate when there's a war taking place right on over here and dozens or hundreds of people need help, and you're not going to help them? Well, of course, get them into the fight. So as soon as we start doing that and doing these other missions, our core mission set, the reason we exist, begins to degrade. Because if you're doing these other skills, you're not practicing and preparing for your primary skill. And so it's a debate which, it's like a pendulum. The pendulum is just swinging back and forth constantly for, the last 40 years for rescue. And I believe right now the pendulum is currently swinging back towards do everything. Because there in Afghanistan, we were doing everything, and it was the best thing ever. I had the best time of my life there, doing that stuff. And then after Afghanistan ended, I said, hey, we're not doing that anymore. We got to get back to our core, Air Force search and rescue. We did that for 10 years. And then now the pendulum is swinging back, and the new Department of War wants us doing everything, getting our feet wet, jack of all trades, I believe is what it's doing now. And, so there's always different parties. It's like Game of Thrones. All these little kingdoms trying to keep their kingdom funded.
Yeah.
Stay relevant and stay in the action. So I'm sure the pendulum will swing back in a direction here in a couple more years. So,
well, on that, it's like the HH-60. When I was casual, I remember everyone talking in the squadron, the new CSAR vehicle was going to be announced any day, and then I think it literally was like, as I was leaving active duty, like, and we're getting the HH-60 whiskey, and then the Air Force has gone some back and forth between buying, I think I'm on 120 to cutting it down to 70. So, that thing's just like constantly evolving. But those the HH-60G they had some time on them, and then now we have
it was they bought it as a temporary stopgap measure there in the early 80s. I think it was some majors at the Pentagon, got some funding. They shuffled some stuff around, bought a couple aircraft, nickel and dimed them. And it was just supposed to be a holdover until, a new airframe came out, and 40 years later, they were still flying. I think Sikorsky designed them to fly for 4,000 hours and then go to the boneyard. And we had birds with 12,000 hours on them. I remember there was one bird, they lifted it up, and there was the main spar, kind of the 308 beam, it's called. It's kind of the backbone of the aircraft. And when it lifted off the ground, a crack so big opened up. A guy took a dime, and he slid the dime up into the crack to try and measure it. Well, it landed, and now the crack closed on the dime, and they couldn't get it out. And so these things were just, they were at the end of their life, patched together, held together with, the duct tape and the baling wire.
Right. Wow.
We had the probes would start vibrating and fly off the aircraft. That happened with the, the big refueling probe.
Yeah.
That thing's like 12 feet long, a diameter like this, weighs hundreds of pounds, and it would start the sympathetic vibration where the whole aircraft is bouncing up and down. And, almost started the sympathetic vibration in my mic there. And
it's gone.
And the windows overhead would blow out because the airframe was flexing so much, and the whole probe ripped off the aircraft and went flying away. And so they were having some trouble.
Gonna be fine.
Yeah. So that was that.
Is there a particular mission in Afghanistan that sticks with you to this day that comes to mind when you think of Afghanistan?
Yes. And so there's one, and it's so extremely illuminating, I think, on the nature of combat, what happens to the human mind in combat, and it's a good story. And so just before we dive in, actually, no, I'll explain it to you so you learn it in the same way that I learned it and why I didn't understand what was happening. It took me a long time to figure out. Okay, so this is 2009. I believe it was early June. So summertime, the summertime fighting season has kicked off, and we are just flying mission after mission after mission. And we would be finishing one mission, and the next two missions are already stacking up. We're already writing down the coordinates for the next mission and trying to figure out our fuel plan and who we're going to get first. And we get word that there's a Marine that's been injured. So we're in Bastion. We're in Helmand Valley, right on the edge of the river. And the Brits are there, the Marines are there, the Army, the Swedes and the Norwegians, I believe, the Dutch are there. And so it's this big hodgepodge of all these different forces that don't have a unified chain of command. There's no standard SOP. and it's just chaos. And like a given mission, there would be different rescue forces racing each other. We're racing the British aircraft, trying to see who gets there first. And we get word that a Marine has a heat stroke, and it was about a half hour south of us. And so he wants to the birds, and all we know is a heat stroke. And we have heard there's a troops in contact going on. So we're flying down there, and then we get another 9-line drops to us and says, now there's a gunshot wound to the neck, and the troop and the tick is ongoing. And so like, oh man, so the fight is still going on. It hasn't died down. And so we start realizing it's a sustained fight, and we're going to be flying into the middle of this fight. And so, so the anxiety levels are rising. You're going into a fight. It's not just a routine land, throw the guy in and fly home. And some guy saved us. It was I remember call sign Acid Rain. I believe it sounded like a C-130 because you can hear the props in the background. And this call sign goes, hey, Pedro, this is Acid Rain. Just got some info for you. And he starts telling us the fight is still ongoing. And he goes, don't approach from the east. Don't approach from the west. Approach from the east. And multiple enemy locations. Contact. Contact. I can't remember their call sign. And he also said there was 2 Cobras that were on scene. Call sign Repent. And so this is all information we had not been given. And so this guy just gives us a data dump, saves our bacon. So we swap over to the other side of the river, get onto the east side, we fly on down, and we set up east of the coordinates, and we can look in, and all we know is we can see a lot of dust rising up, and we can see a few vehicles. And that's all we know. We don't know where the good guys are. We don't know where the bad guys are. We don't know where the shooting is coming from. And we can't contact anybody on the radios because they're using some of those IED jammers. It's just this broad spectrum frequency jammer, and it's just nothing but static. And so we now have the situation where we've got 2 Marines that are Cat Alphas. One of them's bleeding to death from a gunshot wound to the neck. Another one's heat stroked out. And we don't know how time critical these are, but we can't talk to anybody. And there's a firefight going on that we know nothing about. And so how do you fly into and 2 Cobras doing gun runs over the top of this? You don't want to fly into the middle of that and try and land. What if we get in their way? What if is there enemy between us and them? Am I going to be overflying enemy? I just don't know. And so there's all these unknowns, and it violates every single risk acceptance criteria that we've ever trained on. Like, no, you don't fly into the objective until you know where the threats are, where the friendlies are. You're in comms with the guys doing airstrikes, but there's just no information. And so what do you do? And you've got this clock ticking down of some guy bleeding to death and another guy stroked out. And you're like, what if they're dying right now while I'm here waiting? What risk level am I willing to take to do that? And to try and describe that feeling as a leader, imagine 12 of your friends have given you a poker chip, and that poker chip is their life. That poker chip is everything. It's their life. It's their families. It's their kids. It's their mothers. It's their fathers. It's their brothers and their sisters, and everything that they represent in the world, and their place in the world and the human fabric. And they've given you that poker chip, and you're about to put that chip on the table and go all in. And you have to know that you're making the right decision. And it is one of the most powerful experiences you can ever have in the world when you put someone else's life on that table to go rescue somebody. And I can't even describe how powerful a feeling that is. It's so humbling when they trust you to do that. and the responsibility that you bear. And so I'm sitting there, the clock is ticking, and then the other side of it is there's some guy dying out there waiting for you. And so if we went by, I'd say, our traditional risk metrics, we shouldn't have gone in there. You don't go fly into the middle of a firefight. You sit and you wait until you get more information or somebody signals you in. And I was like, all right, we got to go, man. We can't just sit here and go home and run ourselves out of fuel. And so just as we were turning our noses towards those coordinates, and it turns out those guys were sitting there watching us. They've got the guy that's dying, and I'm sure they're like, come on, come on, come on. I'm sure they're calling on their radios, and they can't get through. But when they saw us turn our noses and point straight at us, they knew we were coming, so they popped smoke. So it worked perfectly. So right as we point towards the where our nav needle's pointing, purple smoke comes up, and I'm like, that's it. That's our guys. And so we drop down, and we're trying to get as low as fast as we can, skimming over these. We went right through the middle of this town. I mean, it was. I wish we had GoPros on the aircraft right there and there, because there was this gully that went down, and there was houses on the sides of the gully. And I just tucked right down, and I remember this guy coming right past my door, just looking at him right in the eyes as we go past. And a part of me was like, man, if he raises up an AK, he can just kill me, like me personally, as we go past. But I didn't know where the enemy was, and so I wanted to be in and out of their field of view as fast as possible. So we go blasting in there. I'm keeping my speed up because I don't know where the enemy is. And I just go to that purple smoke and go into just a steep right-hand bank over the top of it and look down to my right. And I see, U.S. Marines, and they're around the smoke, a nice landing spot, but they're in a circle, like, a perimeter, pointing in every direction. And I'm like, why are they pointing in every direction?
This is not a good sign.
I wish they were pointing in one direction, but they're pointing in every direction. And so, I call it to my wingman, that's it. I'm continuing on in. And so I continue and I spiral on in. And so as we're over the top of them, we kind of get a feel for what the area is. And there's a canal running north-south. And I can see there's a bunch of Marines. Everybody's arrayed on the east side of the canal, and they're all firing over the top of the canal to the west. And so I'm getting a feel for what the setup is. So I spiral on down, get on the ground, we land, and our PJs go running out to help get the wounded guy, get him on board. And my wingman now sets up a defensive gunnery pattern up and down the canal. And this is key to what happens later. And so we start seeing, as we're loading this guy up, we start seeing friendly forces on the east, enemy forces on the west. And it looks like the Marines are all firing at one building, one kind of isolated building. And that's where the Cobras, are orienting towards as well. And so it took we got the heat stroke guy on pretty quickly, but the PJs couldn't find the second guy. And so we actually ended up sitting there for over 5 minutes while the PJs are running around out in the battlefield trying to find out where the second guy is, and nobody knows. Because it turns out he's like in a different platoon or a different squad not located there, and that had never been passed to us. And so that's another one of those elements of chaos that we never trained for, is landing to pick up a wounded guy and nobody knows where the wounded guy is. That's kind of I never saw that in training.
That's
not knowing where the wounded guy is, and nobody knows. Yeah. So the PJs are out there running around trying to find this other wounded fellow, and my wingman is flying up and down the canal with this, then keeping a side-firing weapon pointed to the west. So he knows where the threat is, and the Cobras had finished. The the Cobras had figured out our game plan, so they're deconflicting with us. They're in an altitude stack up above us, and so it's all working out perfectly. These guys are extremely professional, and we were working, extremely well together. No communication, never having worked. It's just kind of being able to play a pickup game, and so everything's working out well, and we're getting a feel for what's going on. And then the PJs come back and they go, hey, that guy is about 400 meters north of us in a different platoon, I believe it was. And and you can't walk there. It was across open ground that was under fire. They're not going to carry a wounded guy 400 meters through open fire. And so we're going to have to fly up there. And just as the PJs are telling me that, we see another purple smoke pop up 400 meters to our north. And so like, okay, that's where the next guy is. And my wingman was up there almost directly overhead of the smoke. And so I'm like, oh my God, this is going to work out perfectly. And, so I talk to the wingman. I go, hey man, you see that smoke beneath you? He's like, yeah, I got it. This is me paraphrasing, radio comms. And he's like, yeah, I see it. And I'm like, okay, well, you're going to spin on in and you're going to go land, pick that guy up. And then I will pop up into the gunnery pattern and protect you while you're doing that pickup. And he's like, oh, okay. And so I clear him in to go do that as I leave my location. Everybody's back on board and I start climbing up, to get in a defensive pattern while he's going to land. And so if you can try and picture this, I wish I could, draw on a debriefing board there with multiple colors and angles. He should have stayed west of the canal. Stayed east on the friendly side. Stay on the friendly side of the canal, spiral down and just do a crosswind landing because the winds were very light. But he set up a giant box pattern, that typical landing pattern that lands into the wind, just like he always does in training. And that box pattern took him to the west of the canal, directly over the top of the threat location. Wish I could draw it, but he sets up a box pattern that takes him over the threat. And he starts his approach, descending and decelerating directly over the threat position. So, I'm sure some Taliban guy leans out the window, and this is a gift from God, a helicopter starting an approach directly over his head. So fires off an entire magazine, knocks out, almost took out his tail rotor cables, knocked out one of his missile defense systems. One of the PJs almost got hit, bullets coming through the cabin, gets shot up, and, some screaming, some yelling, aborting the approach, and egress is off to the east for a battle damage assessment to figure out if the aircraft is still flyable. And so complete disaster. And so actually he flew as he's doing his go around, he flies directly underneath me and I kind of popped up a little bit and it would have looked great from an air show perspective. But, he just comes right underneath me, egressing off to the east to get clear of the fight. And so I turned to go with him and now I'm supposed to go with him, escort him to safety, and kind of do a battle damage assessment and reassess, can we get these guys out? Is the threat too much, etc. But as I was in that right-hand turn to go with him, I looked on down once again to my right, and I'm directly over the top of this injured guy with the gunshot wound to the neck. And I was like, man, if we leave, we're going to have to go through that whole rigmarole again of trying to get back in, which is going to take God knows how long. The Cobras will have probably started shooting again. And I'm going to have to go through that whole risk assessment of getting in the way of the Cobras again. And I was also just furious. I was so angry. They say you shouldn't drive angry. You shouldn't fly angry either, because I was kind of like, I was like a rage zombie. Yeah.
I mean, rightfully so.
Yeah. And I was so angry that this had been screwed up like that because everything was going like clockwork. And then he flies directly over the enemy position. And I'm like, just screw it. We're doing it ourselves, single ship. And so I just dumped the power, cleared him off to the east and did a 270, almost like a turning auto rotation. But if you ever heard of people kind of, being in the zone or a flow state or just perfection, for the next 10 to 15 seconds while I did that approach, it was the best I'll ever be as a pilot. It was just dumped all the power, racked it up on its side, pulled aft stick, and I did this turning approach where I couldn't see the guy that was behind me because now he's now to my rear right. I'm turning, and then the nose, as we're coming around, the nose is coming up, and my flight engineer is hanging out the window because he can see. And so he's hanging out the window, calling me around, telling me to steepen, shallow. My co-pilot is giving me parameter calls, calling my speed, calling my rotor RPM, what the engines are doing, how fast we are, the altitude. And we just synced like the most perfect team. It was like they were extensions of my body. And so my flight engineer, James, he's a former dental tech. He was a dental technician for 19 years in the Air Force.
Did he become a senior master sergeant?
Yes.
I think
James.
He might have been the superintendent.
Yes, you know him. Yes.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, I was like a dental tech. Yeah.
He's a salty old SOB. Yeah. Okay, one more story about him when we're done here. And I could tell from the sound of the wind blast on his microphone where his head was pointing. And so I'd never synced with other human beings like that in my life because I could just tell where his head was pointing and from the tone of voice, how well things were going and how quickly things were developing, the tempo, the volume, the pitch, the sound of the wind blast. It was like he was my eyes and he talked me on around, and my co-pilot, Evan, was helping me control that rotor because the rotor's free spinning now. It's decoupled from the transmission, the engines and the transmission. And so it's super, super twitchy. And we pulled that thing around. I'm completely blind on where we're going, but that tone of voice from James told me everything was perfect. And actually there was a little bit of joy in his voice that told me it was exquisitely perfect and keep doing what you're doing. Don't change a thing. And he's like, all right, pull it in. We get the power coming in. The engines are coming online. The rotor recouples with the transmission. I flop it down. I pull in the power. We slap it on down right in the middle. And so the first time I saw that landing zone in the Marines was when when we slapped it on down. We get on down and it was just this burst of joy that we pulled it off. And then James starts laughing just hysterically. He is just dying laughing. And he goes, dude, look off to your right. And I look to my right and there's a rifle lying there in the dirt. There's a rifle with no Marine. And then about 30 meters away, there's a Marine standing there with no rifle. And this guy, this approach was so hot and sexy that this Marine abandoned his post, abandoned his rifle, and ran for it because he thought we were crashing.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
And so, the joke is that was the greatest honor I'd ever been given when a Marine abandoned his post. So I'm like, as you were, Marine,
carry on.
Yeah, carry on. Assume your position there. So he kind of comes running back, gets down behind his rifle, and gets into the position. And so now the PJs all run out, and they go to bring the guy back in. And so while we're waiting for that, my wingman, he does his battle damage assessment. Everything's just fine. And he comes back, he sets overhead, keeps protecting us, and we eventually got out of there. But we got out, and so that was that. Got everybody back, flew on back. He got a different helicopter, and we went and flew more missions, immediately after that. So I thought, so here we start getting into the lessons. I thought that the reason he flew over that enemy position was just a personal failing. He lost SA, he got discombobulated, he got spun around, thought he was pointing in a different direction, didn't know what was going on. Got confused. The next day, we were doing a mission picking up a wounded British soldier from further up north in the valley. And there were some, once again, firefights going on, and there were some Apaches that were hitting the Taliban position. So the Apaches have been hitting them with rockets and 30 millimeter. And so there's a huge dust and smoke cloud rising into the air, several hundred feet, dust and smoke. I sent my wingman, I told him to go in and, I was going to set up a defensive pattern, and he's going to swing, he's going to do the pickup. And he did the exact same thing. He set up a big old box pattern into the wind that took him right next to the Taliban position. And I was like, what the heck is going on? He just got the shit shot out of him. Not even 24 hours prior, by flying next to the enemy position. And here he was doing the exact same thing again. And I didn't understand it. And so I go, okay, he knows where the enemy is. He's just not learning. He's, so we had a very interesting debrief with some elevated voices and some private time, after we got back from that mission, to put it gently. But I always thought it was a personal failing. And then 12 years later, when I was a sim instructor, I began putting my students through the same scenario. I just recreated the scenario in the simulators, and I could get the students to do the exact same thing. I could get the students to fly over the known visible enemy position time and time again, as long as I put enough stress on them prior to the event. And so I started researching some, combat psychology and sports psychology, et cetera, to figure out, why is this happening? It's not a personal failing, it's a human failing. That's why he did it. And so I eventually found some, different stuff from sports psychology on how the mind operates under stress. And the logical, so imagine I'm talking different parts of the brain. We'll say this is your forebrain, the thinking part, the logical part that says, don't fly over a known enemy position. Well, then your midbrain, deeper down in your primitive psyche, is what learns through repetition. It's not logical. It's just repetition. What have you done over and over and over again in training gets embedded in the midbrain. And so the logical brain, during debrief or pre-brief or while you're talking, don't fly over someone who's trying to kill you. Well, when you get scared and when you're in combat, that shuts down and it's gone. And now your behavior is governed by the patterns and habits that are embedded in your midbrain. And in training, what did he always do before a brownout landing? He did a big old box pattern straight into the wind, landing into the wind. And so when he was in combat, the presence of people trying to kill him overrides the logic, and he can only behave as he has behaved in training. And so that's what was happening. And so that was when I'm saying, oh my God, why aren't we talking about this? Why aren't we recognizing this? Why aren't we trying to mitigate this? And so that was the genesis of the book that I wrote, The Three Rings Mindset, on how we work, how we function, and how we can apply that to aviation, to our training regiments, to take it, recognize this human factor, and train for it.
Really interesting, but you're right. You always say you kind of default back to the level of training that you have, right, in these high stress scenarios. So that paints it, puts it together. That, for lack of a better phrase, is a rather spicy story. It seems like you know all the rescue guys, you guys, this is like a day in the life of almost. We're getting a little long in the tooth. I think we're going to have to do a round 2 here as we dive into this a little bit more. I would like to, if you'd be willing to hang around and maybe do a There I Was with 06 Bravo.
Okay.
If you're willing to share that story there. Mm-hmm. But before we kind of part here, you know, looking back, is there any advice that you would give, you know, a younger you to say, do something, you know, a piece of advice, tell him to do something different. That one, assuming he would listen to you, because that is a theme. Like, I'm like, I wouldn't listen to older me. So let's make the assumption that he would listen to you, that you would impart on a younger you.
Give him a couple slaps.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's, I think maybe the book I wrote, that's probably a message to myself. And the importance of repetition, on doing it once you, and particularly for the younger generation, they want to know why. They want to know why you do something. And once they understand why, they will do it. And if they understand human stress psychology on, I need you to do this thing over and over and over and over until you are sick of it, and then do it over and over again. What you're doing is you're inoculating yourself against the effects of combat. For example, let's look at some cockpit procedure. I can sit down and I can figure it out and do it. Kind of forebraining, looking, reading, thinking, analyzing, etc., etc. That's forebrain. That's going to go away when I'm scared. That task has to be embedded in the midbrain. And so you can be doing it unconsciously, without thinking, without paying attention, where your hands are moving without conscious thought. Then and only then will you know that that is how you will survive in combat, and that's how you will perform in combat. Because until you have known true mortal terror, you cannot comprehend it. There was one time where I was so scared. We got spatial D'd in the clouds, did a big whiffer-dill, helicopter just about flipped over on its back. And I was so scared I couldn't read numbers anymore. You can't really comprehend that intellectually, that level of fear and what it does to you and how it shuts your brain down. And so you just have to trust the old guys and go, yeah, you're not going to be able to think. Your brain's going to disappear. Embed those habits in your midbrain through mind-numbing repetition, and that will make you confident. So I would teach him that, and I would also find your purpose. And I got lucky because I found my purpose very early, and I knew my purpose. Purpose is stronger than fear. If you know why you're doing what you do and the consequences of you succeeding, what's the good thing that happens when you do your mission, and the consequences of you failing at your job, that provides the motivation during those training iterations. I have a purpose, and it is so important that I will dedicate all of my time, all of my focus, all of my energy to being the best person I possibly can. That purpose will carry you through the fear. It'll carry you through the boredom. It'll carry you through the doubt. Yeah, so find that purpose and keep that burning, and then do it for your peers as well. As a leader and a mentor, make sure the other people in your squadron know their purpose and the importance of them doing their job. And if you can instill that in people, they'll always do the right thing. You don't have to micromanage them. You don't have to be checking in on them. you don't have to babysit them, because if that purpose burns inside of them, they're going to want to naturally do the right thing. And so, probably the biggest things I would say. And, like you said, take yourself back, sit them down, slap them around.
Yeah. Got to listen to this. This is important stuff. This is good stuff.
Yeah. It doesn't believe you. No, you got to believe me. Listen to me now and believe me later.
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah. It turns out everything just comes true. The older you get, but
yeah.
John, thanks for hanging around for There I Was here in a minute. Thanks for sharing your story. I would love to do another round. I mean, again, we scratched the surface of a lot of what you're doing. And again, the 3 Rings Mindset, that's out now. I'll link that down below so people can check that out. I do love the aspect of, again, you've hit on some things here for me that actually stick, again, that actually puts formal thought and processes and science behind this.
Once you understand the mechanism, it becomes so fascinating. And all the old heads, they were giving you, they weren't telling you why, but their advice was so solid. It came from just that hard experience. Just one more thing is, you mentioned the 06 Bravo mission. So that was just one of the I think it was one of the longest, if not the longest, combat rescue mission we've ever flown. And, we went from Jordan into Iraq into Syria, chasing these 2 lost British Special Forces guys. I filmed almost all of it. And so I've got it on video. I've got the border crossing. I've got searching for the guys in Syria. These Syrian soldiers came out and they were waving at us, trying to beckon us in. And
this is the ultimate teaser for my subscribers right? So if you want to hear this story, so I'll have it on Patreon and stuff. So I'll hit stop here and then we'll go into There It Was.
Yeah, so I'm putting the video together. I'm going to put that on my X page and my LinkedIn page. So
that'd be awesome.
My X handle is John Mangan Books, and also on on LinkedIn, John Mangan. But I'm gonna post a little story about the 06 Bravo mission along with video set to it, showing the search, and and it's I think it'll be pretty fun.
When's that going to come out? When do you think you have that?
I'm going to have that out this week. So here.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So by the time this comes out, people can check that out too.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Yeah. So So by the time this podcast is out, I'll have that up on X.
Awesome. All right, John. Thanks for the time today. Yeah, I look forward to doing this again, and I'll talk to you here in just a second for There It Was.
Okay. All right. Thanks for having me.